Hello, welcome everybody to HR Huddle. Uh, Thank you for your patience as we got in here, and happy Monday, happy June. We are glad to continue some of our conversations on everything HR, talent, people. And today we thought we would drill down on a specific aspect of succession. We know succession is continuing to happen in the profession and at a pretty good rate with baby boomers, retiring, and then the domino effect that is happening when we have partners retiring or people leaving, and how we have to plan for that. And we've been seeing a lot of movement, and it's been interesting in our 25 years of business that we've kind of seen, ebbs and flows of this, but we've been seeing a lot lately of managing partner retirements and transition, and the next managing partner, being named and identified, and doing some transition with that individual. And, we're seeing younger managing partners, which we like, but not a whole lot, consistent around that. But figuring out who the next person is for leading the firm, we think is super important. And we thought we would talk about that, and then other key roles or key, leadership spots that might be being named for the first time, or might be in a place of succession also, because we're seeing that tied to the managing partner succession, which I think is normal, because a lot of times those people got named at the same time, or kind of came into those leadership roles together. And so we're just seeing a lot of it happening in firms, and it's a big change management initiative, and creates uncertainty, creates possibility and excitement. And as HR and talent leaders and partners responsible for this, we think it's important to have a really thought out approach and be able to communicate that, so that we can bring people along so that they know what to expect. When you're naming key leaders like this, it could also create maybe a little bit of friction or competition that we have to manage. So there's a lot that's happening around these big transitions, and we just thought we should pause and talk about maybe some things to consider, some maybe steps to take, and some communications and things from a change management perspective. Jen, what would you add as we're setting this up?
Well, just Tamara, that HR leaders and talent leaders certainly have a massive role here. It's hiring for a position. Most of the candidates may be internal, if not all the candidates, but it's still an open rec, if you will. It's an open position, and we really do need to recognize that we do need to apply talent best practices to this process. That it shouldn't be done kind of as an insider job, a father or mother knows best sort of appointee kind of deal. We haven't seen that be very successful, and so maybe there's a place here for a few do's and don'ts before we get deeper into kind of
How to?
yeah, or the areas of how
Yeah.
to. But
Yeah.
a few do's and don'ts. One is, don't forget that your firm is bigger today than it was when you had the job. So whoever the leaders are that are leaving soon, if it's the managing partner or CEO, or if it's a service line leader or a key operational leader, they often are like trying to completely compare it as if it were apples to apples comparison to their transition. And in general, we're finding that when we stop and have them see, wow, this is totally different. For instance, somebody might have been the tax service leader, back when the tax department was 7 million, and now it's 22 million. And we tell people, hey, that's like a $22 million firm we're trying to find a CEO for. It's a different gig than it was when you took it over. And we can't sort of say, well, the way we did it before and the kinds of things we considered before apply today. Some of them will apply because they're talent best practices, but many of them are not going to apply because we're just bigger and it's more complicated and the environment is different and just a whole bunch of things like that. So that's one don't. Don't think it's the way it was and try to do it the way you did it when you all transitioned the last time. The second might be don't appoint somebody for the job without better planning and consideration and more input from the people that are going to be affected by that leader most. So if I am trying to fill an audit service line leader who is retiring, getting input from the audit partners about what we need, and not, another maybe do here is do think about the role, not what do we need today, this minute, if we had to put the person in, what do we need 5 years from now? Because we're looking for skills and competencies, experiences, and really character attributes that will take us to that place 5 years from now. So do consider that we're going somewhere else from where we are now. Don't just say, I think it's this person.
Right.
And Tamara, maybe you could talk a little bit about when we've seen people sort of name the successor or dictate how who's next, what we've seen some of the backlash to be.
Yeah, yeah. And that sounds like that would be good and efficient. And, we get the reasons to do it. But one of my don'ts is don't expect a clone. We're not trying to clone somebody. And I think that's part of what happens when we name somebody is that Jen's my person and she's like me and thinks like me and it's going to preserve everything I did. And so there's not much buy-in and it limits the excitement and the possibility of what this new person's perspectives and strengths and gifts can bring to that role. And so, we see that can be dangerous, from a limiting perspective. And I think also we see that if you just name somebody, that there isn't this fairness, it's a job wreck. Like, how do we apply for it? How are we selecting somebody? How are we assessing their skills? And Jen, you said attributes. That would be another do that I would have is consider leadership behaviors and attributes of the individual that you want to fill this role, not just skills and experience, which is often what we focus on and maybe limit our focus on. And so we think you need to also look, especially for these key roles, we would say from a cultural perspective, we should be considering, values and leadership behaviors and attributes anyway. But for these important roles, it's critical that we define what are the must-haves that we need from a leadership behaviors and attributes perspective.
So another, don't do it the way we used to. In the past, we would pick the person maybe who had the best technical skills for service line leadership. So, the smartest tax mind would run the tax department. Today, the smartest tax mind is probably too technical and not relational enough to run a tax service line. And the larger your service line, the more that person needs to give up clients and focus on the internal client, the firm.
Right.
And a service line leader job at a certain level is people, it's process, it's pricing, it's product service delivery, it's programs. It's the whole process of running that department efficiently with the right talent, the right capacity, the right learning and development, the right culture. There's so much to it that is just like running a firm. And being a super great technical talent doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at those other aspects, which are, more relational and more, operational. And so figuring out the role, defining the role. And one thing that we sometimes see leaders do, and this is so common and it's such a big error, is we stop and we say, well, let's look at the org chart and let's sort through the people's names and figure out who could do what job. And I always say, throw all the people in a column off to the left and let's ignore that column. Let's talk about the roles. What do we need in each role? Then you figure out if we have the people. And you don't try to say, well, the next in line is this guy or, this gal, she, we used to tell her that she was going to be it. So, I'm sorry, none of that matters at this point. We've got it's all bets are off. Let's define the roles anew and really think about them in the context of what we need from those people and find the folks to fill them that really have the competencies, really have the skills and abilities, innately. They're not trying to make it fit. And there's another thing that we do in succession, Tamara, that's really, it's a sad thing. It's kind of awful for us to face it. And that is, we often want to give it to the people that we perceive to be next in the queue.
Right.
So, there's like a tenure deal or something, like, who's in line for this? So who's our most experienced partner next to Susan? Like that's what we're trying to do, is like give the next person in the queue the job. And that's not how it works in a high functioning, highly successful organization, a productive, work at our highest and best use, everybody work to our strengths kind of organization. We don't say, queue up and you'll just pop into the role and be great. It's not how it works. So sometimes we have to let people know, yes, we know you've been here a long time and you've been a great contributor, but we don't think your innate skills match what we need, and not fake it and not do stuff because it feels like, well, they're next, on the, they're the oldest. When will they ever get another chance? All that kind of stuff. We hear people say that and we're like, wait a minute. This is too crucial for us to sort of settle in hiring because of some, feelings. So anyway, it has to be pretty analytical, I think. Yes, you can let your gut check on competencies, and character, but you've got to first list them and try to see who fits them.
Well, and if you list them and we start to, get feedback on them and we get input on them, and then we go to, as we sit down and we look at it and we, talk, people often will start to self-identify they're not a candidate. And so it makes the conversation easier. I can sit down and say, hey, Jen, we've been talking about this. This is what we're looking at. And if Jen has the self-awareness and, high EQ, she can go, that's not the job I was picturing. I thought it's what Tony's been doing, but this is not for me. But if Jen's not there, then we can at least say, this is not what I think we've been picturing, and we need to step back and look at what this is. It makes it easier to have those conversations. I think the other thing we need to look at that trips us up sometimes is we haven't stopped to say, what does our partner agreement or our operating agreement say about these roles? And we'll go in and do succession planning or retreat facilitation and strategic planning. We'll say, send us your operating agreement, and we'll find things. And sometimes it has things in it like, the next managing partner is the person with the largest client book. And we're like, that's probably not the right criteria for a myriad of reasons. One, because they need to be focusing on the firm, but also because it's not necessarily, again, the skill set we need, or, envisioning 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that person that's going to take us to that next level of success. But we need to read it for what does it say about the managing partner, and then from a vote perspective, because most firms, I know not all, but most firms, there's some kind of a vote for the managing partner. If there's not, you need to talk about, what that looks like. Is there a committee that's going to recommend it, or the board's going to recommend a, candidate, or you need to, know what the process is going to be. And some of it is often laid out in that agreement. Sometimes service line leaders, key roles like that are laid out, but not always, and not as frequent, but we need to at least understand what that is. We think that the service line leaders are more of a hiring, or somebody that we're going to identify from the managing partner and or the board, that we're not going to necessarily go to a partner vote on that role. And so that can just set it up for, first of all, a long process, a time-intensive process. And we want to empower our leaders as much as possible with decision-making authority from a governance perspective. How do we identify people that are going to be put in these, roles beyond the managing partner position, beyond the board, which is often, board or executive committee is often also voted on, but not typically the service line leader, COO, those kinds of things. We're hiring for them. We might be hiring an internal candidate, like Jen said, but those are some of the elements that we also need to pay attention to that can trip us up if we're not looking at them.
Yeah, following governance and being careful not to put in too many approval steps.
Right.
We've had some firms like they're going to let the partners vote on their service line leader. We don't love that idea because we don't want it to be a popularity contest. We don't want it to be whoever, the people who want a certain change to happen, they're going to back their candidate. All of a sudden we're politically campaigning, and it just, we don't think that's good for firm leadership or firm governance. We do think it's still an appointed position, whether the managing partner CEO appoints it or whether an executive committee appoints it. It's still an appointment of some kind for those service line leader roles. But that can be tricky if those roles get automatic seats on an executive committee or board or that kind of thing. So Tamara's right. We've got to read that governance ahead of time. And some firms chase it. They start heading down a certain path and people raise, hey, this doesn't feel like it's in line with our partnership agreement. And, there's a reversal that has to occur. So watch for that for sure. The other thing is these key roles in general, in the past, our business is celebrating its 25th anniversary. So Tamara and I have been inside firms for a long time. We've gotten to see a number of these guard changes. And, in the past, they weren't very valued, these roles. You gave one for the Gipper or whatever. If you were taking the role, you were going to serve a bunch of clients. You were still going to be measured traditionally on new business and developed and personal billings and billings under your own personal management, and you were going to fight with like personal production against department management or service line management. And at a certain size firm, that's probably okay. When we get to, I'm going to say, I don't know what it is, 10 million, or more, there's got to begin to be processes where I'm measured more on the success of my book under management, which is the entire department I'm managing, than I am on my personal book or production. And I just want to say that one of the huge mistakes we can make is so devaluing it, because we still sort of force people to work two jobs essentially, that people don't want the job because they can't picture winning. And they certainly don't think they'll financially come out ahead. And so another mistake in replacing these positions is not structuring KPIs and transitioning work and really valuing them the way they should be, paying them the way they should be. They really are the most important roles in the firm. And some people who aren't gifted in leadership and administration like this, they would think, I don't want to hear that. I'm pretty darn valuable. I'm super technical. I've got this huge client base. I'm a massive rainmaker. What do you mean? And maybe there are some super duper incredible rainmakers or something that make more, but service line leaders and firm leadership should be well compensated. They should be qualified to do the work. They should have clear and measurable goals. They should be held accountable for certain performance of the things they're managing that can be indisputably measured. So it's not that we're saying you put them in the job and pay them more and they can do whatever they want. That's not how it works. But our biggest concern there would just be trying to have your most selfless person take the job, because no one else would take it if they still have to carry everything they carried before they got it.
Right.
And the other thing, Tamara, is this is a hard one, and maybe you can take this from me, but I don't think we should pick him. He's got such a good big book of business. Let's pick someone else with a smaller book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when you were talking, I was just thinking about, we have to plan for transition and allow that to happen. And they might be the right person and they have the biggest book of business. And so how do we free them up from that? So there's a few things around that. One is we have to look at the domino effect of this transition. It's not just this new person in the role. And if there's somebody retiring, like a retiring managing partner, now I have a new managing partner, it's not just that managing partner, transitioning. We have to transition the new managing partner. A big part of it likely is client transition. And then, oh, by the way, your managing partner is not the only one transitioning, could be retiring, but could just be transitioning out of that role. You have other people, so we have to look at it holistically. So we are looking at all of the client transition that is happening. And as we're looking at, client assessments and culling and those things, we're paying attention to how do we move that forward? What does that look like? And then we have to look at our senior managers and our new partners. And, there's like a all the way down. What are we transitioning and moving? But also that person could have really be the face of the firm. And if that's one of their strengths, how do they do it at a higher level as a service line leader or a managing partner? And how do we create the capacity for them to be able to do that? And, their referral sources. So I think that's important. And the risk of the client transition, and I said, we're starting to see younger managing partners, younger service line leaders, they might do this for 10 or 15 years and then have 10 more years left. And so we have to look at our compensation and say, we have to pay them fairly for the role they're in, like Jen was just saying. But we also have to say, how do we have an off ramp for them for these roles and not penalize them on compensation if they're going to build their book back up, or as we figure out what their next role is, if we are overly focused on book of business in our compensation, which many firms still have that as one of the largest pieces of it. And so we have to be careful of that. Not only could we penalize them taking on a service line leader or a managing partner role because that's how we're compensating, but we could penalize them for doing it for 10 or 15 years and then saying, okay, my last chapter is going to be something else. We need to put some provisions in place. And we would put some kind of an agreement in place for 2 years that says we're going to protect your compensation as you build your client base back up, or as you step into a new role that we have, if it's not a client serving role, and that we figure out what that is, because otherwise it's dangerous for them to take that on and say yes, and they'll be generous, but to the detriment of them and their family and their livelihood. So we have to again look at that holistically, and that client piece has lots of tentacles on it.
Yeah, Tamara, I was just thinking, I was talking about the mistake of saying, well, this guy's in line next. That's the mistake of there's somebody like eight people back in line, but they are super qualified. They're the best person here, but man, they're just too successful right now with client service. And they're kind of young. And, I think we should wait and just let's pick a 50-year-old or something so we don't have to worry about the off ramp. Or a 55-year-old, then they can just retire and get out of here. You were just talking about that, where we should pick that future leader, that young, right, incredibly successful person, but you got to put those protections in place.
Yes.
And then they'll do it. And what would happen if they applied their super duper, mojo success formula to the firm or to the service line? I love that. And we've certainly helped firms do that. And so that's why we know it can work.
Right.
It's important. So I love this conversation. Thank you for making sure we talked about it today, Tamara.
Yeah, of course. I think it's important. And if you have thoughts about it or questions about it, you can reach out, let us know. And we will see you on the next HR Huddle. So take care. Have a great week. Thank you for joining us.